In workshops on 6 continents, there are still lathes running that were built in the 1960s. They weigh nearly 2 tons and hold tolerances measured in 10,000ths of an inch on the same castings they shipped with. Machinists call them the Rolls-Royce of lathes. They were built in one place, a factory on Pitt Street in Cayley, West Yorkshire, by a company called Dean, Smith and Grace. This is the story of how that company spent 150 years in one town, then left. To understand the company, you have to start with the town that made it possible. In the mid-1800s, West Yorkshire was powered by textiles, and textiles depended on machines. Mills needed spinning frames, power looms, carding engines, and all the precision metal parts that kept them alive. Keighley was becoming a centre of machine tool production because the supply chains for castings, forgings, and skilled labour were already there. It was the right place to build machine tools if you knew what you were doing. The founder was Joseph Dean, born in 1825 near Barnoldswick on the Lancashire-Yorkshire border. He learned his trade as a whitesmith and later served an apprenticeship under a millwright named William Park in East Morton. By the 1860s, Dean had gone into business for himself in Bingley with 2 local mechanics, John Spencer and John Mitchell, under the name Dean, Spencer and Company. They built machine tools from rooms above the canal on Park Road. The business grew fast enough that in 1867 they moved to larger premises on Pitt Street in Keighley. For a moment the company looked settled. Then the partnership started to unravel. Mitchell left in 1869. Spencer left in 1873 to start his own firm. Dean was left with a factory to run and no partners. Instead of scaling back, he recruited 2 new men from the local trade, James Smith, a toolmaker, and John Grace, an engineer with heavy fabrication experience. Between the 3 of them, they had the skills the company needed. The risk came immediately. The trio borrowed heavily to buy a large plot of land from the Duke of Devonshire and build a proper factory. They called it the Worth Valley Tool Works. For the next decade, every penny the company earned went toward paying off that debt. But the bet worked. By 1883, the loans were cleared, the factory employed about 75 men and 30 apprentices, and the company was making planing machines, shaping machines, slotting machines, drilling machines, and precision lathes. Its catalogue was already serving locomotive builders, marine engineers, ordnance manufacturers, boiler makers, and shipbuilders. In 1898, the business incorporated as a limited company, by which point the founders were already aging. Dean retired in the late 1880s and moved to Ilkley. John Grace died suddenly in 1904, and his son Percy eventually sold his shares to the Smith family and left for Canada. James Smith died in 1906, leaving 3 sons ready to take over: Herbert, Arthur, and Harry Smith. Dean died in 1909. By then the company had become Dean, Smith and Grace, 1908 Limited, and the second generation of Smiths ran it. One name often attached to the story is Herbert Smith, but he was not James Smith's son. He was born in 1889 and joined the company after studying mechanical engineering at Bradford Technical College. He later moved into aviation and became one of Britain's most important aircraft designers during World War I. He helped design the Pup, Triplane, Snipe, Dolphin, Cuckoo, Salamander, and the Camel. The Camel shot down more enemy aircraft than any other Allied fighter in the war. Herbert later worked in Japan for Mitsubishi before returning to England, where British aviation would not take him back. His grave was unmarked for years until a headstone was added that called him an aeronautical genius. Back at Dean, Smith and Grace, the early 1900s brought a major technological shift: high-speed steel. Before it, tools were limited by the heat they could absorb. With high-speed steel, lathes could run much faster and with heavier feeds, but only if the machine itself was rigid enough. The Smith brothers understood what that meant. They abandoned bespoke custom work and committed to a standardized line of steel-geared lathes built for extreme stiffness. That decision defined the company's future. A 1904 article in American Machinist described one of the company's lathes removing 1,800 pounds of chips in an hour. That was not a sales pitch, it was proof. During World War I, the Worth Valley Works entered the military supply chain, producing breech blocks for heavy artillery. The firm received a letter from Lord Kitchener recognizing its contribution to the war effort. Harry Smith also helped with local war hospitals and ambulance services and was honored in the 1918 New Year's list. The interwar years were difficult. In the 1920s, the company built an Art Deco frontage on Pitt Street, a confident statement that turned out to be badly timed. The Great Depression nearly killed the business. Orders collapsed, and workshops that should have been buying new lathes were patching up old machines instead. The factory looked impressive from the street, but inside it was barely hanging on. Then World War II arrived, and the company roared back. At peak wartime production, the Worth Valley Works was turning out 107 heavy machine tools every month, about 1/5 of all lathes made in Britain. The company supplied every branch of the armed forces, the Ministry of Supply, and naval repair ships that needed parts fabricated at sea. It also became one of the first all-male engineering firms in West Yorkshire to hire women on the factory floor. DS&G even financed a Spitfire for the Royal Air Force. The company's machines were built for rigidity first. Its semi-steel bed castings were heavily ribbed, stress-relieved, and designed to resist torsion. The result was a lathe that could take a brutally heavy cut and still hold tolerances measured in fractions of a thousandth of an inch. That combination of rigidity and precision is what set DS&G apart from other British makers like Colchester, Harrison, Holbrook, and Alfred Herbert. The company also ran its own foundry, forged its own tools, and even had custom overalls made for workers by a local tailor. Apprenticeship was serious business. Boys started in the tool room and learned filing, drilling, reaming, honing, and scraping from the ground up. The company supported further study, ran a medical surgery, offered pensions, and built deep loyalty among its workers. Its product line covered a wide range of heavy and toolroom lathes. The entry-level 13-inch swing machine was enormous by the standards of the day. The 17-inch toolroom lathe became especially respected for its accuracy, and special versions were made for Rolls-Royce with hand-scraped bearings. The 25p oil country lathe served the petroleum industry and remained in demand for decades. A favorite of Machinists was the fast-lock spindle nose, a quick change system that let operators swap chucks rapidly without losing concentricity. DS&G machines had a reputation for feeling indestructible, and their 137-center lathe became a post-war staple across Europe and the Commonwealth. The company also kept expanding. In the 1940s and 1950s, it shipped lathes across the world, including Australia, Japan, Italy, the Netherlands, Turkey, Spain, Mexico, and Argentina. A new foundry on Lalomi Lane in the early 1960s helped keep up with demand, and by then the workforce had grown to around 700. The company adopted numerical control by 1968 and was already making NC versions of its heavy lathes, while many British competitors were still hesitating, but the machine tool world was changing. By the 1970s, cheaper Asian imports and the cost of a full CNC transition were squeezing British makers. DS&G sold to Monarch Machine Tool of Ohio around 1973. For a while, the partnership worked. The company built CNC lathes, integrated American controls, and expanded its product families. But the irony was obvious. By the late 1980s, Monarch's own manual lathes were being built in Cayley and shipped back to the United States with Monarch's name on them. The subsidiary was carrying the parent. In 1992, Monarch decided to close the Cayley operation. 127 years of continuous manufacturing on Pitt Street were scheduled to end. The managing director in Cayley scrambled to put together a management buyout. He succeeded at the last possible moment, severing the American tie and restarting the business as DSG Lathes. The company was smaller but alive. For the next decade, it survived by servicing its own legacy. More than 43,000 DS&G lathes were still working worldwide, and the company knew how to rebuild them better than anyone else. In 2005, Nigel Granger bought the company. He was an ex-Rolls-Royce apprentice who understood precision engineering at a deep level, and he treated the business like a restoration project. He restored the original Dean, Smith and Grace name, repainted the reception area in the old blue and grey livery, recovered portraits of the founders, and expanded the catalogue with new CNC and pipe lathes. For a short time, it looked like the company might stage a real comeback. Then the financial crisis hit in 2008. Capital spending froze and companies stopped buying heavy machine tools. Orders evaporated. Granger fought as long as he could, But a small manufacturer could not survive a global credit collapse forever. The company went into administration. Its assets were bought by New Smith Stainless, then later by the Machine Tool Technology Group, which tried to modernize the brand and invested in new products and facilities. In 2015, the company left Pitt Street and moved to Halifax. The remaining staff were offered positions, some were made redundant, and the reaction in Cayley was raw. Generations of families had worked there. For a town that had already watched its textile mills close one by one, losing DS&G felt like the final cut. Today, the company still exists as part of a specialist engineering group with services that include CNC retrofitting, robotics, automation, and complete mechanical rebuilds of legacy DS&G lathes. It buys back old machines, strips them to bare castings, updates them with modern controls, and returns them to service. The castings are that good. The iron is that sound. You can still see DS&G machines in museums, but most are still at work. Ask machinists about them, and you will hear the same thing. The machine feels like it was built for a harder job than the one you are asking it to do. It seems like it could hold tolerance long after the operator is gone. What keeps those machines alive is not just nostalgia. It is the fact that their design still solves real work in repair shops, one-off fabrication and restoration jobs where modern automation is unnecessary or inconvenient. A heavy manual lathe gives an experienced operator direct control, immediate feedback, and the ability to take a cut that a lighter machine would hate. In that sense, DS&G machines are still practical, not merely historical. The company also left behind a culture as much as a product line. Apprenticeship mattered because the machines demanded judgment, not just muscle. A skilled machinist had to read the cut, hear the tool, and know when the work was right. DS&G built its reputation on the idea that the operator and the machine had to be part of the same system. That is one reason old examples still feel alive when they are running well. They were built to invite competence rather than hide it. The move from Pitt Street to Halifax marked the end of an era, but not the end of usefulness. A factory can be emptied, a name can change hands, and still the machines continue to earn their keep in other places. That is the unusual part of this history. DS&G did not disappear into memory. It migrated from a town to a network of owners, rebuilders, and users who kept proving that the old engineering still had value. That is the story of Dean, Smith, and Grace. A company built by men who knew iron, carried by generations of craftsmen, and undone by the same technological shift that reshaped machine tools everywhere. The factory left town, but the machines kept going. The name changed, but the iron remained. There is another reason the name still matters. DS&G was never just a factory that sold large lathes. It sold confidence. When a shop bought one of its machines, it was buying a structure stiff enough for hard cuts and cast iron heavy enough to damp the kind of vibration that ruins finish. That is why old DS&G machines are still mentioned with respect by people who have never seen the original plant. They rewarded patience and careful setup. That reputation outlived the corporate structure because people kept rebuilding the machines rather than discarding them. A worn lathe can be stripped to the casting, scraped back into geometry, and fitted with new controls or bearings if the underlying iron is sound. DS&G machines made that possible by being overbuilt from the start. They were designed for a world in which a machine should last long enough to be handed down, refurbished, and handed down again. That is not a sentimental detail, it is an economic one. A tool that survives for decades changes the way a workshop thinks about capital. The company's later years also show how difficult it is for any industrial firm to survive a change in the rules of the game. The move from manual and NC lathes to fully computerized systems did not just add electronics. It changed what customers expected, how fast they expected it, and how much they were willing to pay for reliability. The firms that survived were the ones that could keep their core virtues while absorbing the new control systems around them. DS&G tried to do that through buyouts, ownership changes, and modernization, but the industrial geography around it had already shifted. The old machine tool town had become a harder place to defend. Even so, the legacy is not a museum piece. The rebuild business, the retrofit work, and the ongoing demand for legacy repairs show that the company still lives where practical need meets technical memory. Some jobs are too rough for delicate automation, and some shops still need the kind of honesty that only a heavy manual machine can give. That is where DS&G continues to make sense. It belongs to the class of tools that do not chase novelty. They stay available because the work never fully disappears. So the company's ending is not a clean ending at all. It is a long transfer of usefulness from one generation of owners to another, and from one town to another, while the machines themselves keep earning their place. The smokestack may be the visual relic, but the real monument is every lathe still turning in a shop somewhere on 6 continents. That is the form the story takes when a machine is made well enough to outlast its makers.